Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Snake Sports Talk Show here on the Spotlight Sports Network, wherever and however you may be watching and listening today. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram here for all of my latest posts, and subscribe to the Spotlight Sports Network and the Snake Sports Talk Show on YouTube. And follow me on Spotify for all of my latest podcast episodes. We're live here in Las Vegas. What a crazy day that we've got today. We've got a lot of stuff that we got to break down, but first and foremost, I hope all of you guys are having a great weekend. Happy Sunday to all of you guys. Man, what, I'll tell you this. Before I start, I spent some really, really good quality time with my family last night. We go and, we're hanging out at the house. We're doing like most all the other average American families are doing throughout this pandemic. We're either binge watching television shows, anything to kind of keeping us occupied, keeping the fun. So, of course, we decided to go down to the Strip. It was about 7:30 last night, and I took some pictures of it. I'll actually have it uploaded a little bit later on, but it's one of those memories that you won't forget for a long time. When the world itself didn't seem normal. I mean, you could just look at every single picture in the Vegas Valley. I mean, the Strip, there was always people walking around it. The Strip was always active. You get tourists, you get locals, you get everybody. And you got events. You had every single event, whether it was at a sporting event, or you were at one of the clubs, or you're at one of those, you were at those fancy, those fancy events you couldn't afford. But all of that now at a halt. I mean, you see the city very, very differently. Probably what you've never seen in a long, long time. So I'll have those uploaded. I just think it's such a surreal moment. I mean, this has been my hometown ever since I was born here, and I've never seen anything like it. I've never experienced anything like it, and it's definitely one that I will cherish for a long, long time and keep with me. So let's go ahead and shift to this here today. So, by the way, because we had a lot of different signings, but there's one signing that, of course, is questioning everybody, and I'm sure is questioning Dallas Cowboy fans. The Dallas Cowboys have signed quarterback Andy Dalton to a one-year, $7 million contract. And everybody's asking, why are the Cowboys signing Andy Dalton? What does this mean now for Dak Prescott? Is Dak Prescott now getting pushed? What's going on with Dak? Everybody's freaking out with the fact of Andy Dalton, who spent 9 seasons in Cincinnati, is coming to Dallas, and he's not here to take over Dak Prescott's job. Understand that. The reason that he's there is because he's serving as an emergency backup. Isn't that what most of these quarterbacks now have been doing? Isn't that what Jameis Winston did? Took a backup role in New Orleans? Because God forbid, if something were to happen to Drew Brees, wouldn't you want the best backup on your squad? Think about what happened with Tennessee. Marcus Mariota didn't even live up to the hype as a starting quarterback, and it had injuries. In comes Ryan Tannehill, and he takes the league by storm. So there's nothing wrong with this signing, and there should be nothing that should be, overwhelming the idea that Andy Dalton's coming into a Cowboys system, knowing you got Dak Prescott. He still doesn't have a contract, and everybody's questioning and wondering, what the hell is Jerry Jones doing? Because Jerry Jones, in the draft, you get CeeDee Lamb. Now you got all the weapons and the wide receivers in the world. And maybe this is something to push Dak Prescott just a slight bit. But if you think about the situation that's going on with the Cowboys and with Dak Prescott, mind you this, Jerry Jones was offering Dak Prescott a multi-year contract that was going to be worth $33 million a year. Dak turned that down because Dak said, I think I'm worth more than this. Okie dokie. So let me ask you this. And this is, you could look at stats or you could look at all these contracts however you want to. When was the last time that a quarterback who had the highest paid contract in the league amongst all quarterbacks, when did they win a Super Bowl? Or when did they even make the playoffs? I'll tell you the ones who didn't. Matt Ryan, when he got that big contract, didn't make the playoffs. And I'm not talking about the previous year when the Falcons went to the Super Bowl. I'm talking about the year after. Aaron Rodgers gets a big contract. He doesn't make the playoffs. So what does that tell you? When you pay a quarterback more than 30 to 33 million a year, the chances of making the playoffs are pretty risky because of the fact of it's a lot of money, it's a lot of pressure, and we're not even sure if the quarterback's going to perform the same way. Now, everybody's going to look at the exception of saying, well, what about Patrick Mahomes? Patrick Mahomes is going to get $40 million a year. He's the most deserving of it. Of course he is. Of course he's most deserving of it. But why would people say that? He's a Super Bowl champion. He's an MVP. And it's like he's got no flaws to his game. But we did see the knee injury in last season's Thursday night game. And we all know how that panned out. I mean, I'm not saying Patrick Mahomes is not worthy of $40 million a year. But this is where organizations look at this from a broad perspective. If you have to think about what Dak Prescott has done over the years, I mean, he's dealt with Ezekiel Elliott's holdout. He's dealt with the pressures of Jerry Jones looking over his shoulder in a big-time marketing franchise like the Cowboys, who the Cowboys hadn't been winning a whole lot of games, let alone making the playoffs, until Dak arrived. And then, of course, you got Dak, who in situational games is trying to win division titles, trying to win playoff games. All the pressure's there. But I'm sure the real question that everybody's asking of, if that's the case, why did the Cowboys go 8-8? If that was the case, I looked at the schedule and I thought the Cowboys were going to be a 13-3 team. You get Jason Witten, who's a veteran tight end, a little bit more veteran experience in the room. You got a defense that can shut down. Now you don't have that no more with Byron Jones walking, and you go and get at least a couple of, some really, really good secondary corners and maybe a couple of good defensive front line guys, but you lose Robert Quinn also, the leading sack guy. So it's going to be interesting of the story with the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not sure how this is going to pan out, and I'm not sure how it's going to play. But here's the thing. They're in a situation where they got a lot of mouths to feed. I mean, you already paid Zeke. Now you got to pay Dak. And then you already paid Amari Cooper $100 million altogether. Soon you got to pay DeMarcus Lawrence. Soon you got to pay Leighton Vander Esch. You got to pay all these guys. And we're not saying Dallas doesn't have the money, but of course, they're paying them for they're paying it for their own reasons. They're paying these players for their own reasons. But it seems to me Dak Prescott doesn't appear to be the reason in Dallas's eyes. Now, here's the only thing. This could change depending on how Mike McCarthy produces. If Mike McCarthy can get Dak Prescott to being the quarterback that he should be in this league, then by all means, Dak Prescott would be worthy of a contract. But part of this, though, too, once you turn down a contract that's $33 million a year, I mean, that seems fair to me for a quarterback. Honestly, I know everybody wants to rant and rave and say Patrick Mahomes will get a $40 million contract, and then what will Dak Prescott and some of these other young quarterbacks do? They now want a contract most like Patrick Mahomes. But the other thing that you have to look at when you pay a guy high millions of dollars, that could potentially affect the other side of the field, your defense. That could potentially harm your chances of getting the best defensive players, maybe even potentially your good offensive linemen. And look, why again, I've said this, weapons, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, they come and go in this league. But the only ones that should stay permanent are your quarterback, hopefully your offensive line, and the development of your defense. Those are the most important key components. And absolutely, Patrick Mahomes will be the first to get a $40 million contract. Absolutely. But when you look at Dak Prescott's situation with this, having to deal with Zeke's holdout, having to deal with the pressures of the franchise, including Jerry Jones, and mind you, the Cowboys were barely on television for most of the time until Dak arrived and Dallas was winning games. Now all of the spotlights are all on the Cowboys. So, and I tell you this, there are teams that wish they had that. Because I guarantee you this, and no offense, but the Patriots, since Tom Brady leaves, I don't think there's going to be a prime time game that's going to feature the Patriots now. But that's because of the movement. So, and this is where, as I've said, Jerry probably looks at this and says, Dak, let me explain something to you. We were offering you a contract. We were going to give you 33 to 35 million a year. You turned it down. That's our best price range. So we're going to bring in a guy. Lives down here in the heart of Texas. Went to school at Texas Christian. They all call him the Red Rifle. He's a gunslinger. Probably the fastest gunslinger in Texas. Named Andy Dalton. And it's not going to take over your job. But we're just letting you know that we're bringing this quarterback in. Because the thing of it is why Jerry Jones would want to bring in a guy like Andy Dalton. I'm sure is going to push Dak Prescott to be the best that he can be. And Jerry Jones, absolutely. $33 million, you either take it or they're going to potentially draft another quarterback. But that's where it all comes toward Dak Prescott. And everybody's saying, pay Dak, pay Dak, pay Dak. But they made him the offer. But Dak decided to turn it down. That's where people are kind of missing this. So let me shift to this. Since we're talking about quarterbacks from here, now we know that, Dak Prescott, this is not going to affect his starting role, but it is potentially going to remind him we have a quarterback in place if the deal don't get done. That's it. So here's one quarterback, because I'll tell you this, out of all the quarterback signings, here were the ones that got the gigs. Case Keenum, he's got a contract. Teddy Bridgewater, he's got a contract. Andy Dalton, recently got a contract. Jameis Winston, surprisingly, has a contract. He's got a job. But wait, what other quarterback am I missing? What other quarterback am I missing who doesn't have a job? Oh, that's right. Cam Newton. I guarantee you Cam is probably sitting in his couch, as all of us, throughout this pandemic, and is probably out there rolling his window up from his home and is screaming out, hey, guys, hey, I'm unemployed. I don't have a contract yet. You're forgetting me as a quarterback. I can still play. But of course, the speculation of it is it's not just about Cam Newton's injury. Listen, why did all these quarterbacks take the contracts in the first place? Because if need be, these quarterbacks are taking a step back and saying that if all else fails, We could come in at a time. Look at what happened with Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill came in the best position possible when nothing was working for Marcus Mariota. He got a starting job. What's to say Jameis Winston, luckily, he's in New Orleans now, that if something was to happen to Drew Brees, what's to say that Sean Payton will elevate his game, make a few adjustments, and Jameis will be a much better quarterback than where he was in Tampa? Think about it. You got Emmanuel Sanders. You got Mike Thomas. You got Alvin Kamara. You've got some good offensive weapons in New Orleans system. All the matter is that Sean Payton's trying to do is cut the INTs. That's what he's trying to do. How about Case Keenum? Well, think about it this way. Baker Mayfield has all the pressures on his shoulders. And Kevin Stefanski, who is very familiar with Case Keenum's play style in Minnesota, remember, Minnesota made it all the way to the NFC Championship game against Philly. But of course, we all know the end of the story. But the point of it is, if this doesn't work for Baker Mayfield, knowing he has OBJ, Jarvis Landry, David Njoku, Austin Hooper, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, you've got offense everywhere, and you have a healthy offensive line that's there to protect you. No excuses, Baker. That's what Kevin Stefanski is letting him know. Anything fails. I've got a guy that I've worked with in Minnesota named Case Keenum, and he worked just fine in this system. Think about it. In Cam Newton's position, what is he expecting? He's not expecting to come into the league as a backup. I don't believe that. If that were the case, he could have already had a contract by now. But I guarantee you, the second Cam steps in, he wants a starting role. But he's not going to get that. And that's where Cam has to be okay with the backup role. Look, I can guarantee you this. Living in the Vegas Valley, I'm hearing an awful lot of sports radio guys screaming and hooting and hollering of the fact of why Cam Newton doesn't have a contract and Cam Newton feels disrespected. You're throwing away the former MVP, and he took the Panthers to a Super Bowl, and he was a Rookie of the Year. Listen, in this world, in this business realm, people don't just hire you because of your accolades. People want to know what's your productivity like? What's your work ethic? Are you a guy that's willing to be on top of things? Or are we going to expect some mistakes that may have to bring us back here into the conference room to now have to discuss it? Because we want to make sure that we're on the same page. That's a level of trust. In Cam, you can't trust him in certain situations because of all of this inconsistency. Listen, I don't care for some of the accolades as much. The only time that I care is if I see a lot of consistency and it shows, then he's living up to his standards. He's living up to being the Rookie of the Year. He's living up to being the MVP. Hopefully, he lives up to the fact that he's a Super Bowl champion. But after Super Bowl 50, way too much inconsistencies. Way too much inconsistencies. And you wonder why Cam, amongst all these quarterbacks who I had just announced, even Nick Foles gets traded from Jacksonville because they believe that Gardner Minshew is the real deal. And he goes to Chicago. And here's the other thing, and I'll also announce this a little later on, but the Bears declined the fifth-year option for Mitch Trubisky. So what is that telling you? That's telling you Trubisky better get himself going. But, and absolutely, Cam is a pocket passer. But here's the other deal. I've always compared Cam to Russell Westbrook. You only see one version of Russell Westbrook, and that's athleticism. You don't get multiple versions of Westbrook. I don't get the 3-point shooting version of Westbrook, much like I don't get the deep ball throwing version of Cam, or I don't get, the game changer version of Cam, much like for some of these other quarterbacks in this league. So that's why it's going to get harder for Cam to end up getting a job. I've said this before. If the XFL didn't end up going in bankruptcy, I think he could have easily had just, spend a little bit of time in the XFL to keep yourself healthy, keep yourself agile, and it also will show a lot of these NFL owners. It'll show a lot of these NFL owners, okay, Cam's actually getting better. That's all they're looking for, is better results. We all look for that. And yes, that's why there's only a certain limit to your athleticism that you can trust and rely on before your body tells you, hey, I can't do it no more. I got to change up my game. But that's where Cam, is he willing to change that? And that, of course, is, as I've said, that's the reason why I think right now Cam seems to be, quote unquote, the elephant in the room amongst all these quarterbacks who have contracts. Coming up next, I'll be talking a little bit more, on the NFL, because I think that there are some interesting stuff that we could be expecting for next year. And also, too, tonight, you got The Last Dance. You got episode 5 and 6. That all will be starting tonight. You can also catch us here on the Spotlight Sports Network, as myself and a couple of our great colleagues are going to be, we're not going to show the viewing, but we're kind of doing a little bit of a watch party. Do a watch party, get to discuss it a little bit more. But I'm excited for 5 and 6. And it's going to be very, very interesting. And here's what we can prepare for that coming up next on the Snake Sports Talk Show.
I wouldn't want to be like Mike. It's an impossible task.
This is not one of those lifestyles that you envy, where you're confined to this room and ready for getting out of this life. So when you get to that point, I'm there. And with no reservations at all, I'm there.
Little bit of a sneak peek there of The Last Dance tonight. It's going to be really, really interesting. This whole documentary has been really, really good up to this point. And I think in this time, in these times of uncertainty, I've been very, very happy with the fact that, we've been able to get some sort of content to talk about from here, because nobody really truly knew about, the story about the Bulls and about MJ and Scotty and Dennis, because there were a lot of question marks. There were a lot of uncertainties of, the Detroit bad boys as well in the middle of the mix. But, you have to think about it. But this is going to be interesting, though. I really, before the break, was Mitch Trubisky. So the Chicago Bears have announced that they have declined the fifth-year option for Mitchell Trubisky. So now a lot is on the line here for the Bears quarterback. And this is one who was a second overall pick in the 2017 draft. And he finished last season with the 28th QB rating, worst in his career, tied for 27th in touchdown passes, and was 21st in passing yards. The 25-year-old is going to be earning $4.4 million in 2020, and then we'll have the $9 million salary cap. So, the Bears ended up finishing 8-8 last season, and they fit offensive linemen to protecting Mitch Trubisky. All of this is stirring Trubisky to be 5. This is already going to be year 5. I'm not taking anything away from Mitch Trubisky. 1 year. The 1 year comes into the NFL, had an interesting rookie year. Then it got better by year 2, and not sure what happened in year 3, going 8-8 and missing the playoffs. A lot of the fact of the matter is, you're coming into your 4th year, and we should be expecting something. We should be expecting better results. I mean, you've got offense. You've got offense. Well, we're waiting to see what happens with them. But this is the opportunity, and this is the time now. You're catching Green Bay at their worst point. So, this is a time of no excuses. I said this about Baker this through. They could have easily gotten Deshaun Watson, because I guarantee you now, they look at Deshaun Watson in Houston, and they wish it would be interesting. And, we'll see. We'll see. Speaking of declining another 5th-year option that was declined as well, Bill had a couple of injuries. The 24-year-old is set to earn $2.8 million. Listen, John Ross, I think, is he was on the verge last year of having a really good, promising season. But then at the end of it, just kind of lost it. But I mean, you have to think about it this way. I mean, John Ross, as I've said, offensive guys, they come and go in this league, and John Ross is a fast guy. Like, don't get me wrong. He's utilized his speed, much like how we're seeing wide receivers in this league now, to where they're getting first downs, they're getting scores, and that's where I think is the big question. Now, they did end up drafting T. Higgins, and that's where I think is going to push John Ross a lot more. Because if they see another disappointing production out of him, then they're going to cut ties. I mean, and they've got plenty of good offensive guys. A.J. Green, who's coming back, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Auden Tate. So Joe Burrow is going to have a really, really good offensive set here for this Bengals team. But it'll be interesting to see what happens from there. So, of course, we ended up talking a little earlier about the Cowboys signing Andy Dalton, and everybody's having some concerns about what this is going to mean for Dak Prescott. So, amongst that, he'll now be the other quarterback to guys like Cooper Rush, Clayton Thorson, and Ben DiNucci. This is not going to affect the chances of Dak Prescott's position, because, at the same time, the Cowboys were willing to give Dak Prescott a $33 million a year contract. They were willing to give him that, a sneaky move that in case of something was to happen, they do have a veteran quarterback in place. I mean, you have to think about it. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler. He's made the playoffs, hadn't won a playoff series, but he's still a guy that can, have at least a good amount of production. What's to say, though, that if something was to go on with Dak Prescott and the way that the Cowboys are shaped, now this is going to be interesting because yet you lost Travis Frederick in your offensive line, so there is a gap exposed. But what's to say Andy Dalton doesn't come into this offense and he gets a little better? That's where it's pushing the potentials of Dak Prescott, and especially with this contract negotiation and this contract holdout potentially. But this is going to be interesting. I mean, we've had a lot of interesting moves all throughout this offseason and through the draft. So, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I don't think this should change Dak Prescott in any other way. I don't see it like that. So, Kukoc ended up talking about Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen in The Last Dance and the Chicago Bulls. So, just a few days, and this was actually written by one of the best ESPN senior writers, that just after a few days that the Bulls won their 6th championship, Phil Jackson organized a dinner for the players, coaches, and their wives at a Chicago restaurant. And so, Kukoc, Steve Kerr said it was a special moment, and that was the last moment that they were all together. He said, I set a toast to Tony. Nobody had to go through what he did. The pressure from Michael, Scotty, to earn his keep. And they were all over him about being Jerry Krause's guy. So Tony Kukoc, and this is what was kind of the thing. Like, Kukoc felt like he was like in this bubble. He felt like he was like up in this bubble, couldn't really get out of it. And everybody kind of remarked a little bit of, he's Jerry's guy. He's the one that Jerry kind of, he looked at and put this whole thing together. So I can't imagine that. But at the same time, I mean, you have to think of all these impactful players: Scotty, Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, Horace Grant, Tony Kukoc. Look, you have to think of it one way or the other. It wasn't like they were trying to, like, during the season, get under each other's skin. But you have to think about just the heat of the moment in that particular aspect, and even in that era. And Tony Kukoc, he was a hell of an impactful player when it came to a guy who knew what his role was. He wasn't somebody that was just like, looking to take over anything, and that's why I'm like, I kind of feel a little bit for Tony Kukoc, but man, I'm excited for 5 and 6. I'm excited for 5 and 6 tonight. This is going to be interesting. All right, so that was your hot press. So since we're talking a little bit about NBA, what I'm going to end up doing here in my best for last, as we're kind of wrapping up the show soon, is, because we ended up getting reports that the NBA was supposed to open up their facilities on May 1st. That's not happening. We're now expecting May 8th for them to open up their facilities. Now, they did mention one thing, that the scouting combine and the draft lotteries have both been canceled. They both have been canceled. So I made my piece yesterday, and I said this. I said, I think the NBA at some point needs to get rid of that lottery draft. It just doesn't make any sense for them to have a lottery draft like this. I mean, they should do what the NFL does. But this is where I'm going to give out my top 5. I'm going to give out my top 5 organizations who I believe deserve and earn the right to have those top 5 best draftees in the draft class. And I'll explain each of them why coming up next on the Snake Sports Talk Show. All right, you guys. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in today. What a fun show it has been. And speaking of the Chicago Bulls for tonight, since we're watching The Last Dance, today actually marks 9 years since Derrick Rose, when he played with the Bulls, he was the youngest NBA player to winning an MVP. Derrick Rose was a hell of a player, very, very impactful. And there was always that time where I just wished he would have stayed healthy I wished he would have stayed healthy in the playoffs. That's just one thing that I really, really do wish that could have happened. But it happens with a lot of it happens with a lot of players, but he was very, very impactful. But I'm very, very glad in the position that he's in now. He's having a hell of a career, and I'm glad that he's still being able to play. But I just figured I'd share that with you. So I'm going to end up breaking down because, as I've said before when going into the break, for my best for last, we don't have an NBA draft lottery anymore. We got that canceled now. And I still believe that the NBA draft lottery, they need to get rid of it. Just get rid of it. Think about all the players in the NBA, one of the biggest impactful players. Look, I understand that in some of these organizations, they don't attract free agents as much. But at the same time, you get all these young kids. We just seen it just this past year. Zion goes to New Orleans. Everybody's freaking out about it, but think about this. New Orleans, they got something special. They got a lot of really good young kids who I think could be very impactful superstars in the near future, including Zion. So I think it works for that. Ja Morant goes to Memphis, and Memphis is close to being a playoff team. And it just shows how much of an impact that Ja Morant has in that organization amongst everybody there. And there were a couple of good notable players. Kobe White in Chicago, I think, is going to have a really, really good future. I said my steal of the draft was mine was definitely Carson Edwards. I love the kid. Watching him in March Madness that previous year, man, he was draining threes as if again, in a shooters league like this, I think he's going to make it. So I figured I would give my top 5 teams who I think, because we've seen them over the years, we've seen a lot of their struggles, and we figured that if the draft lottery was to go away and it just becomes a regular draft, much like the NFL, that if teams were tanking, they were going to end up getting the eligibility of getting the first overall pick, then to 2 to 3 to 4 and 5, and so on. So I figured the 5 would be better because mostly some of these players that come into the NBA draft, the top 5 guys are very, very impactful players. And then the list itself goes on. And, some of them, they either do make it in this league or they have to, they have to find other ways to develop themselves to be NBA impactful players. So here we go. Top 5 teams who I think are deserving of the top 5 draftees in the draft. So I'm going to go with Charlotte here at number 5. I think that this organization, now we know that under the ownership of Michael Jordan, has not been the greatest, but here's the one thing that you can look at. And I spoke with a really, really good client of mine, and his son plays currently for Charlotte. You know him, PJ Washington Jr. These kids that come into this organization, I've always said this is a developmental organization who they get these really, really good potential superstar players. They build them up through their system first, because Charlotte is definitely a place that is not really attractive for free agents. However, some of these kids that come up from the draft, I mean, you had PJ Washington, you had Miles Bridges, you had a couple of these really, really good impactful players. If they were to play elsewhere, the second that they hit their primes, I mean, they either make it or they break it. But this is where I said that this is a developmental organization. And I think Charlotte for sure, they need to have a little bit of that reload, that juice. So getting these young kids in the draft. So I think that they're worthy enough for number 5, in my opinion. Okay, so number 4, I'm going to have to say is the Chicago Bulls, because I think Kobe White is going to have a really, really good career. He's a heck of a player. By the way, in the last couple of games that Chicago had played before this pandemic hit, Kobe White was actually pretty special. I mean, he was pretty special to watch. And if you think of how Chicago's management had gone on for a long time, I mean, they fired the general manager, they fired the coach, they fired up a lot of people, and now Chicago is getting back into that groove. So this is exciting stuff for, the Chicago Bulls. But I think being worthy of the number 4 overall pick, because these are the guys that are under radar players, and these are the ones that I think are going to be very, very impactful in these organizations. But in Chicago's position, they need something going. You got Zach LaVine, Lauri Markkanen, and Markkanen, he's a good player. He's a good player. He's been off for at least a couple seasons, but if they get him back into that groove and keep him up with Zach LaVine and hopefully with Kobe White being an impactful young player, star talent, Chicago may be going somewhere. Chicago may potentially be a team in the Eastern Conference that could be making good moves. So that's why I think Chicago to me is worthy of number 4. So I think number 3 to me is I'll have to say this is definitely something that I would give Minnesota at this point. Minnesota needed a lot of different changes. They needed a lot of adjustments. I mean, they got some good players, Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, but I think up to this point, Minnesota, I believe, just needs a little bit of a revamp. I mean, they got rid of Andrew Wiggins. They got rid of Jeff Teague. They got rid of Jimmy Butler. They got rid of a lot of guys, and guys that I thought were going to be impactful with this organization under Tom Thibodeau, but that didn't end up working out, and all of them dispersed, except for Karl Anthony Towns, and then they acquire D'Angelo Russell. So, I look at Minnesota, and I look at the type of organization that they are, and, I mean, over the years, since Kevin Garnett left, they've been kind of teeter-tottering. I mean, the last impactful player was Kevin Love, but I think in Minnesota, in their position, they don't really have too many of good players except for 2 impactful ones. But I think that if they get the number 3 overall pick, they could use that for a potential good superstar who could be, a really good face of the franchise in the near future. But that's where I think that Minnesota definitely needs that. Okay, so this is no surprise to me. I think to me personally, the Cleveland Cavaliers are a number 2 for me. And look, we all say a lot about the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay, they're not, after LeBron left twice, they haven't really been the impactful organization as they once were. And this is also another franchise, much like Cleveland Browns, Cleveland Indians. And I don't know if this is an Ohio thing, but they don't attract too many free agents. They got Andre Drummond and they got Kevin Love, which I really don't understand all that. I really would have thought during the trade deadline that Kevin Love would have been moved. But of course it was harder because there wasn't really most teams that were looking for a guy like him. And I thought he would have been impactful. I thought he would have been a very impactful person or player in a different organization. But Cleveland, I mean, they need to start revamping all these draft picks. They just need to start revamping all these draft picks. I mean, Colin Sexton, this was not a big splash. And Osman. Osman, I think, is a really, really good player. But outside of those guys, I don't really see anything that I could look at Cleveland right now and think, this is the team that could potentially turn things around.
I'm just not seeing that. So that's why I think that if they accumulate all these draft picks and they get themselves the number 2 big time impactful player, because think about it. Memphis got Ja Morant. Think about it if Cleveland ended up getting Ja Morant. And for as impactful of a player that he is, I mean, it could have turned the organization around, but that's where Cleveland's got to accumulate all these picks. I mean, there's nothing really much that they can do at this point, but I still think this is the smarter and the safer option if I'm the Cleveland Cavaliers. Accumulate these draft picks, get some really good developmental players, and hopefully get this organization going. Okay, so the moment that all of us, NBA fans watching would love to see the moment, and there are so many, analysts and people out there who would love to see this happen as the number 1 overall pick, and that is the New York Knicks. Look, it's no surprise. It's really no surprise, and it's really, it's not really a coincidence either. Look at all over the years that the New York Knicks have had to deal with. I mean, since Carmelo left, the organization has not looked great, and I'm looking constantly. All of us are looking constantly at James Dolan. What the hell are you doing? And I'm waiting patiently because James Dolan was able to sell the forward over at MSG to Steve Ballmer and the Clippers, but yet you're still not selling the team. That's one that I think is really, really interesting. And I'm still waiting for that day when James Dolan sells the Knicks. But again, this is an organization that has not had a winning culture in years. This has not been a winning culture. And look, I'll be honest with you. I've got family that live in New York, and I know how New York runs. New York runs by, if you ain't winning, we don't care. That's literally how some of the fans are. Okay, and I'll be honest with you. I've come across that. If they're not winning and you're making too many mistakes, they're going to turn their heads away and they won't care. As long as you're winning, that's what's drawing all of these fans' interests. I mean, I could tell you out of New York sports, which are the ones right now that could potentially be winning. I could see the Giants getting themselves back up again. The Jets have been making some interesting moves. The Yankees, well, let's just hope injury plagues don't happen again. And then you got the New York Mets. They got some interesting players. And I love Pete Alonso, but then you also have the Rangers and the Islanders. The Rangers, surprisingly, since getting Artemi Panarin, they've been looking like a really, really good team. But of course, the question is, when are we going to see the Knicks get better? When? Dear Lord. But that's why I think that the New York Knicks, I'm waiting for the day that they get the number 1 overall pick. Because for years and years and years and years, the Knicks have not had splashing successes. I mean, they've been known for, fun times at Madison Square Garden. I mean, hey, being out in New York, I would love to catch a game. I mean, I would love to catch a game in the Garden. I'll be totally honest with you. But this is where I think New York needs juice. They need juice. They need a whole refresh. They need everything. And I just don't feel like that the ownership under James Dolan is really the one that I'm looking for. I've got to have a guy that's willing to have a mindset of, we want to win. We want to win a championship. We want to get back into the groove of the Eastern Conference like we once were. Like, granted, we didn't have all the players, but that's where the Knicks got to get better with it. So I think that if they, again, same thing with Cleveland, accumulate the draft picks, get yourself some really, really good superstar talent, and revamp and revive this franchise, because I guarantee you that the second we see that, look, we said the same thing about the Cleveland Browns. We don't want the Cleveland Browns to fail, because we've seen the Browns and how long the drought was. I mean, it was excruciating. It was painful to watch. So, again, I think that this would put a smile on Spike Lee's face, knowing that the Knicks, they get better. They get some superstar rising stars. So I think it would be interesting. And here's the thing. If you accumulate those draft picks, what's to say some of those superstars won't come to New York? and I understand with what New York is going through, even with this whole pandemic and everything else. But that's why I say I think they need a refresh button. They need something to keep their chins up, keep them hyped up. So I think the Knicks would very much be worthy of number one. So those are my top 5 right there. And again, I think that if they got rid of the draft lottery, because I would say the same exact thing about hockey as well. But then again, hockey's in a different realm. So you could do either or of the lotteries or the regular picks. But this is where I've capped this off. So number 5 was the Charlotte Hornets. Number 4 was the Chicago Bulls. Number 3 was the Minnesota Timberwolves. Number 2, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And number 1, the New York Knicks. Look, I just look at all these organizations here in the NBA, and I mean, you have all the impactful ones, the ones that attract superstars. I mean, Los Angeles has been attracting so many superstars. Surprisingly, I mean, you get these developmental players. Like, think of it this way. Milwaukee, I've said this before. If Milwaukee didn't have Giannis, they could have been a relocating team, because Milwaukee, I mean, since the championship, they hadn't really won much. But since Giannis came into the building, they've looked like a completely different franchise. And I've said this before. Giannis is the reason why that he saved the franchise. And I still say this to this day. But for all these other franchises, I mean, Cleveland's an absolute mess. New York is an absolute mess. Minnesota, they're semi-messy, but at the same time, and then you got Chicago, and then you've got Charlotte. With Charlotte, as I've said, they're a developmental organization, much like, let's say the G League. I mean, you get a lot of these players that come in from high school, and they develop them. They develop them really, really good. They're not chasing for anything. But I still think that in order to revive this franchise, I mean, you got to have some really good, impactful players. And for Chicago, I mean, Chicago, God, the general managing and the coaching's always been questionable for me. Like, could we at least get a better coach? Somebody call Mark Jackson, for God's sakes. Could somebody call one of those good coaches there to get this team going? But that's just what I feel like. One of our really good friends. We need sports back. I'm losing my mind with nothing to watch. Yes, trust me, I know. But I will tell you this. I mean, look, I've been keeping myself occupied. I'm doing my podcast, even doing my live streams. It's really kind of kept me occupied with everything. And not to mention, too, I mean, hanging out with family, spending good quality time, clearing my mind out, taking nice drives. I may actually do that a little bit later on. There's a spot here in Vegas that's really, really nice. It's almost like a park. And it may be something where I might do small picnic. It's in like Northtown. So it's like a little park, but they also got some little small like lake beds. What's kind of funny of it is you have some houses that are there. And people that actually own their boats. So they sometimes like to kind of drive around in those small lake beds, just kind of, chill, hang out for a little bit. So I think that's definitely something I'll be able to do, just kind of clear my mind off. But I really do appreciate you guys jumping on. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know, comment, comment, share with me your thoughts, what you guys think. And, we'll see you for the next live stream here next weekend. I can't wait to start this up again. And as I've said before, you've got The Last Dance, episode 5 and 6. Can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. Interesting to watch. Hope you guys have a great Sunday. Have a great weekend. And for those of you that are currently working, or maybe not, hope you have a great week ahead. Can't wait to see you guys soon. Next weekend, Saturday, Sunday. Snake Sports Talk Show here on the Spotlight Sports Network. Tune in later on as well for the watch party for The Last Dance. See you guys soon.